Hello, everybody. I'm Nir from Equitech Israel. We're fintech consultants and leading a fintech community called Fintech Aviv. I'm going to moderate a panel about future of blockchain and its impact on different industries and businesses. So, guys, welcome. Thank you, DigitalK, for hosting, of course. Let's go around and have a brief introduction, please.
Should go ladies first?
Ladies first, of course.
Thank you very much. I was going to say I don't think I was properly introduced, so I'll take those matters into my own hands. Good to see everyone here. My name is Toni Lane Casserly. I'm the co-founder of a media publication you might have heard of in the blockchain space called Cointelegraph. And I have spent the last 5 years building a company or a movement called Culture. And culture is simply the idea that the future of government is culture. And our planet will reorganize past nation states and into blockchain-based communities.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Toni. Anton, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anton. I'm a software engineer at the Ethereum Foundation. I'm a local from Sofia, so thanks for hosting me in my hometown.
Yeah, round of applause. Why not?
Well, the Ethereum Foundation is a non-profit which basically aims to accelerate the Ethereum protocol, and basically we are trying to have the highest impact that we can in the community. This means that it aims to do what no one else wants to do in terms of, let's say, commercial entities. So we are giving away grants to the community, not to help them, but in order to empower them to help us. We're also hosting events and doing in-house research and development, core protocols, and everything Ethereum related. So that's all.
Thanks very much, Anton. Amit, please.
Thank you, Nir. Thank you for being here. My company is called Teneos, and what we do, we provide credit. We use crypto assets as collateral for that credit. And what we try to solve is basically enabling people that hold crypto assets. We enable them to access liquidity without liquidating their assets.
Thank you, Amit. Nicola?
My name is Nikola. I'm actually also a Bulgarian local who has returned now, and I work for Eternity, which is a blockchain infrastructure based in Liechtenstein, by the way, coming back to the last talk. And currently we're focusing on building the ecosystem in and around the Balkan area in order to actually enable projects like the ones that we hear here.
Thank you, Nicola. So let's start with the first question, a bit of a maybe general question, and feel free to answer if you want to answer it. Let's talk about blockchain a little bit. Okay, it's a buzzword, right? We know it's been a buzzword, and the newest buzzword now is ICOs, of course, on top of that. What do you think, guys? What's the main barriers in adopting blockchain solutions in different industries? What do you see goes around? Please feel free to answer, whoever wants to answer.
Well, rather than looking at this from the perspective of an institutional investor, I think we have to understand where, as an ecosystem, we're at in development stage. We are still building TCP IP, right? The industry is, in and of itself, still being formed. We don't even have the ability for blockchains to communicate meaningfully to each other yet. So I'd say before we have real development, we need ecosystem unity. And I think that will happen within the next 5 years, but it's not going to happen overnight, right? That's a complex kernel to hack. But you have to remember, we're still, and this is also when people ask me about buying, like we are still in early adopter phase. This is just the start of the curve, and it's really just the start of the industry. So that means the opportunity for innovation is huge. And that also means that the number of companies that will totally crash and burn is also going to be huge. Just expect that.
Definitely. Thanks, Tony. Anyone wants to add to this?
I would actually agree with you, Tony. And if you look at projects like Ion, for example, who are trying to build this bridge between different infrastructures, yeah. I mean, it sounds really cool, but it also takes time and a lot of work and also a lot of developers to actually create something like this that works and that does not crash and burn. Yeah. So, yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys.
I would like to add about regulation. The regulators, even though it's a very, very young industry, they're trying to step in, not wisely sometimes, and this disrupts and basically puts hurdles in the way that this can grow. On the one hand, we need the regulators to make this much, much safer for young companies, but on the other hand, if they don't do it with the right policies, it's something that will cause harm to a very, very infant industry.
Let me ask you a question about this, Amit, with regulation, or maybe the lack of regulation here. Because it might be considered as an opportunity or as a threat? What do you think about it for startups? If I'm a startup, blockchain startup,
It's both. If you want to enter a blue ocean, it's definitely a place to be. But on the other hand, there's always a risk that the regulators will stop your activity or prevent some of it, and this puts a very, very negative influence on investors. And usually these startups, they need investments from investors. So it could be a pro, it could be a con. It's really related to the project. In general, for me personally, I like to enter environments which the rules are set, but in this instance, you cannot set them right now because the ecosystem is not yet developed.
thank you for that. And Nicola, maybe we ask you, because the lack of regulation here is definitely obvious, and as one who made a huge ICO here, how do you think, or how do you see the future of blockchain in regards to regulation, in regards of technology?
Okay, so first of all, we never made an ICO, we did a contribution campaign. So.
Contribution, I'm sorry.
Second of all, when you speak about here, I think it's a global thing. So you have countries like Estonia, Malta, Gibraltar, Liechtenstein, where we're also incorporated, that are trying to start setting up actual legal frameworks in order to ease not only young companies into actually, let's say, a smooth operation. So, because right now what we have, a lot of companies don't exactly know how to react. Like, if I go ahead and do this, what is going to happen? Am I going to go to jail tomorrow? You know, is the SEC going to call me? Should I take out the US from my token sale? What am I going to do with Singapore? All those little things. Getting some kind of start of a framework is a great thing, but what we have witnessed mostly, not only here in Eastern Europe, but pretty much everywhere, is that regulators do not exactly know how to work with this technology,
Right.
because there is, let's say, a scarcity of knowledge, and trying to get people who have worked in IT but have never coped with blockchain or decentralized infrastructures per se are not the right people who are going to set frameworks that will be able to regulate countries, projects on a global basis. So I think it's very, very important to get people who have been in the space for a long time, who have pushed a lot of innovation in the space, to collaborate rather than actually work against them in order to create something which is going to benefit for everybody.
Right, and when we're talking about the impact of blockchain on different industries, we, for example, see in Israel the impact of blockchain in many blockchain solutions that are related to, for example, agriculture. When you have blockchain solutions to, for example, cut the mediators between farmers and retailers, or different blockchain solutions that are actually helping import and export in a more efficient manner. Mm-hmm. And Anton, maybe I want to ask you, how do you see Ethereum as an enabler in this industry, and what's the maybe barriers in adopting Ethereum? What's better in Ethereum on top of blockchain? How do you see that?
Well, as we already mentioned, it's a new technology. It's under development, less than 3 years on production, so to say. So to compare it with other older blockchains, Ethereum allows you to run programs on it, the so-called smart contracts, which are essentially programs. I don't really like the word smart contract, because when we say contract, most people think about the law, and code is not law, law is law. So we're just running programs, and bad things can happen. So we need to understand what are the consequences of that. So basically, that's the main selling point of Ethereum. It's a platform where you can actually run programs, and you can run them in a trustless environment. So it's the first time in history that you can basically have a transaction with someone that you don't trust on this platform, and you can have a very good guarantee that the transaction is going to go according to what both of you expect.
Thank you. What do you think are the most mature use cases for example, smart contracts? You don't like this definition, but it's very easy maybe to understand. What are the most mature use cases or well common now?
Token sales?
Well, that's true. So Ethereum is mostly used for ICOs. We all know that. And maybe a big percentage of those ICOs are scams, but it's also showing that a lot of regulation in that industry is also not what people want. People want to be able to invest. So I would say that the traditional venture capital and investments is on the one end of the spectrum. The current ICO style is on the other end of the spectrum. So probably we want something in the middle where people who are not in the top echelons of every country can invest, and regular people also have that choice.
Thank you, Anton. Anyone wants to add anything on top of that? Tony,
Well,
please.
I'd just like to say about the regulatory environment, we have to, in perspective, understand the amount of wealth this industry is generating. $500 billion, okay? The Bitcoin blockchain is not even 10 years old. It's still in its infancy, right? If the regulatory environment would like the economic opportunity of a new wave of creation to stay within the bounds of their nation, their state, they're going to have to be thoughtful. And they're going to have to be progressive, because otherwise people will get up and leave. You know, Bitcoin is already, the Bitcoin market cap is 24.5 in the list of 193 nations in terms of the money supply in these countries in less than 10 years. So I think what we'll see is if we have certain regulatory environments that aren't conducive, smaller nations who have the ability to open up this opportunity, even larger nations, even like Australia, you know, they will create new boundaries for people to innovate in without setting unnecessary barriers, because otherwise the wealth will leave. It will go elsewhere. This is digital global wealth.
It's
Definitely,
happening in
Tony.
Israel. In Israel,
Yeah.
the regulators have not been able to be on the leading pack of regulation.
Yeah.
And a lot of the ecosystem in Israel is now looking for ways to have an R&D unit in Israel, but the whole company structure is based out of it. And the country would lose a lot of money in taxes, in employment, because of this mismanagement of regulation.
Yep,
Yeah, but
absolutely.
the really cool thing that we're seeing and
Yeah.
recognizing now is that under or less developed countries and nations are now actually enabled to pretty much leapfrog ahead a lot and become first world countries in a matter of 1, 2, 3 years.
Yeah.
Because they don't have to go to this entire path. They can immediately implement this technology because there's not the structure that hinders it more than it should actually.
Well, how do you see, guys, maybe the governmental use cases, by government, the adoption of the government of blockchain solutions? Do you see any future for that also?
Have you stood in Sofia and tried to actually get an official document?
So documentation and processing documentation, that's your answer.
Like information and actually being able to use it and getting it and sending it in terms of this, for bureaucracy reasons, like I would absolutely love to see that implemented.
When do you think it will happen? What's the timeline for that?
Well, it depends. Like you need to see how the GDPR compliance and all that stuff now can happen, and that literally threw back a little bit everything. But it will happen. Like there just needs to be like a nice, smooth entry to it, because there's a lot of people that now also say, is a smart contract actually going to take over my work? What am I going to do? Like, what's going to happen?
So it's
there's
always the threat, or the people are afraid that technology will replace
Opportunity
them.
always
but-
carries with it a threat. So.
Right.
It's also something about, from a psychological point of view, blockchain means that trust can now be not controlled by a central entity. And the government is a central entity. They say that once in every X years, they do an election and they gain the trust of the people, which some would say is bullshit. But
I would love to see election on the blockchain here in Bulgaria.
But for this to happen, the government need to understand that they need to give this trust away back to the people. And it might happen in a generation, but right now, all the application, making bureaucracy simpler, that's fine. But that's not what the blockchain will be about. At the end of the day, it will be about giving the power back to the people. It sounds like very, very hippie, like the 1960s. But at the end of the day, this is the main thing about it. And the current governments, I don't think that in any place in the world really want to do that.
Mm-hmm. So the decentralized feature of blockchain,
They
you think
try
that's
to put it aside.
Well, and do you guys know why nations were created in the first place? Think about the way that we distributed contracts, rights, and land throughout history. We had tribal chiefs who essentially organized all of the resources and all of the property with their memory. And if the tribal chief's memory didn't work so well, then tribal violence. Then we had kings and queens who said, now the property is easily organized because we own everything. So there's one central entity that owns everything. Then we have nation states. And nation states are supposed to be essentially jurisdictional houses of record, right? That was originally why the nation was created. It was to house the contracts. Blockchain is a global jurisdiction. We no longer have the need for a trusted third party to validate those contracts. Because you can say, I own my identity or I own my property because I validate it, and then these 30 members of my community can come in and say, this is a trusted person who is a steward of this land. We really are taking the rights of the world and distributing it back to humanity, peer to peer. So in the way that nations look to adopt blockchain, it's the same way I talk about some of these larger institutions like banks. Yes, you can try and make a private chain, right? That's perhaps a step in innovation. But in the long term, the implications of this technology are going to extend past the reason for being, the raison d'être of both nations and banks. We're entering into an age of totally new organization of our human race, of our resources, and of the structures that help us to form and generate real meaningful wealth for each other and for our planet.
Thanks, Tony. And I'm going to ask you, how do you see, we're on a future of blockchain panel, right? So how do you see the future of blockchain is? What's the tipping point of this technology? I mean, practical use cases. And we can be futuristic here, yeah? We can just imagine now. But how do you see that?
Well, that's a really good question. And I think every use case has the ability to be a practical use case, right? We don't have to say a practical use case is doing payment processing or making an exchange, like making a wallet. These are some practical use cases. I guess I tend to think bigger than what's practical. And I think about what's going to help the most people. So I think what will help the most people is providing every person on the planet with access. Real access for the first time in human history to global sources of wealth. That's going to change our planet. You know that if we took the budget that we spent on war in the United States and we repurposed it into colonizing space, we would already be there, you guys. We would have an entire new civilization and a new structure. If we repurposed the food we wasted in the United States alone, we would cure world hunger. And what blockchain has the ability to do is take all of these resources and all of these organizations that have built consolidate and control mentalities. Darwinian, like I gotta hoard this food or else we might not make it through the winter. And it's actually going to provide a global record of all of those resources. And it's my hope that when everyone on the planet can see these numbers and can see this information meaningfully and publicly, we can actually be more fair to each other, to our humanity.
Definitely, we see that as blockchain is getting involved with different industries such as agriculture, healthcare, of course, and even infrastructures. So yeah, it's an impact statement here. It's better for the humankind as a whole. How do you see these guys? Yeah,
I think it will enable the basically entrepreneurs to use the blockchain as a platform from emerging markets. So nowadays, if you want to build a company, what you would do, I mean, a company on the internet, you need to have some kind of hosting, you need to process payments, as we heard from all the people during the last 2 days. And the way you do that is you go to Amazon or Google or you go to Stripe in order to run your business. I really hope that in the future you will be able to just do that on the blockchain with much lower barrier to entry. Right now you can process payments just by running a smart contract and providing a service, and it's available to everyone in a much lower barrier. Hopefully this is going to happen also for decentralized applications, where you would just deploy your application on the blockchain or on an off-chain that's connected to the blockchain, and you would just be able to run your company without having to deal with those silos.
Right, Anton, as a tech guy, I would ask you, what is the lowest hanging fruit here as maybe blockchain entrepreneur that wants to enter into the business? What would you do today? What kind of startup? And what audiences would you reach?
I would work on the protocol level because the infrastructure is not there yet, and I've seen a few startups already who get into the ecosystem with great ideas, which would totally change how we work, but they just see that the infrastructure is not there. So what they do is they start working on the infrastructure. I mean, the companies I would like to build, you cannot build them today. So you need to work on the base layer.
Thanks for that. Anyone want to add?
I would like to add something to that. Last year, a lot of things developed very, very quickly. So there was a huge surge in speculative activities, and a lot of value actually was created. But on this infrastructure layer, as you just mentioned, less was done because people saw this low-hanging fruit, which was the token sale. And now, as things are kind of like pendling into some kind of more, very, very cautiously using the word stable environment, even though we still have a ridiculous fluctuation, we're seeing that people are moving now back more and more to this infrastructure layer because they have understood that on one side, if you don't have the infrastructure base layer, all those applications are going to be worthless.
Right.
Besides the fact that about 70 to 80% of them are going to crash and burn because they're ridiculous scams. And the second thing is that from a product level perspective now, you see that people are starting to bring out the first applications, but as we're still in this mindset from last year and the year before that where we had such a surge in value that they're like, you know what, I'm not going to spend this token now for what I actually bought it for. I'm going to hold it, I'm going to keep it, and I'm going to wait until it appreciates again before I'm going to spend it. And then the people that actually created that product are sitting in front of their computers and laptops like, why did we do that? You know, like we wanted to add value, we wanted to create something cooler, we wanted to cut out the middleman, we wanted to like have zero fees for transactions, something like this. And now nobody's using our product because everybody is kind of hodling.
Holding their holdings. Yeah, we were talking about it on the backstage when we said, okay, so there's a token now, nobody uses it, but yeah, it's like a long-term investment, like people use gold.
Yeah, but it's also frustrating because people have put a lot of work into this, people have had great ideas, and now you're sitting there and you don't see the movement you would wish for that everybody praised.
Let's talk once again, for 1 second, about the lack of regulations in ICO. You talked about maybe certain level of, you know, theft that can be done through this process. How do you see that, or how do you see the lack of regulation in this manner as a threat to the whole industry?
Are you asking me directly or like the whole group right now?
I'm asking you because we were just talking about it, but please feel free to answer.
I absolutely dislike projects that are using people's funds that they have gathered in order to scam them out of them. Like, that should be an absolutely no-go, and those people should be hunted down, honestly. Like, it's the worst thing that can happen. Because in this change of society that we have now, and this like technological change that we have and everything else, people are striving and have great ideas that might also be undervalued actually because they themselves don't know how to position it. Though so many great projects right now should be enabled because those ideas will change the world. We're going towards, you know, like all the, as you mentioned, like all those main use cases and everything, but we're also going towards a shift in like everything else. When you look at, I'm always a big fan of liquid democracy, for example. Like for me, it's absolutely amazing, and now we have the opportunity through voting to be like, you know what, if you don't perform the way you should and the way you were expected to, you're out of here. We're taking the next person that actually is being voted into. You don't have this limitation of like classical structure anymore that now needs to change, and this regulatory aspect needs to also adapt into this new technological way that we're kind of paving. I mean, like, Tony has been around forever, actually, like when it comes to the space, and so have been a lot of other people. But on a global scale, like, it's really hard to change a regulatory mindset which has existed for hundreds of years, actually.
Right.
So this needs to happen. This will happen, and it just takes a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit of more foresight and also adoption now in the next, hopefully, year, 2, 3 years, before people realize that blockchain is not here to hurt, it's here to help.
Of course, and you also mentioned the electoral system maybe, that governments can be helped with blockchain for this, and I think it's a very interesting use case for this, but it will take, of course, some time to implement, as long as we're talking about adoption by government, so of course it takes time.
Well, regulation is definitely going to come. I mean, the bad thing is that if we have 95% of ICOs or whatever being scams, it's going to, I mean, we're going to lose this way of funding. I mean, the government is going to ban it. Already, banks don't want to touch ICOs. They don't want to process your funds. So we either have what the previous presentation suggested, owners of companies basically going to the style of raising funds from the old world, or from the community point of view, we need to keep companies who raise funds through ICOs accountable. And there is a way to do that, just decentralize the accountability for the companies.
Right. Amit, I would like to ask you, as we both are coming from Israel, from Tel Aviv, working there, how do you see Israel and Tel Aviv as ecosystem for fruitful blockchain developments? How do you see that?
So I think that in the first stage of blockchain or Bitcoin, it was a very, very niche activity in Tel Aviv, and it wasn't very, very hyped. And I think that what we've seen in the last 2 years is an explosion of entrepreneurs leaving their normal entrepreneurial activities and moving into the blockchain. It's very, very clear. Unfortunately, some of it is because it appears that there's a lot of money now in this space. A lot of the entrepreneurs are fed up with chasing VCs. And when they saw that the ICOs are coming, of course, it was very, very easy to shift model, build some sort of utility token on top of it, and start doing the ICOs. There's a very, very big ecosystem now around all things blockchain. I'm pretty sure that it will be growing in terms of the actual developing teams and the people driving it. In terms of VCs, I think that they don't know how to deal with it right now. Some of them see it as a new opportunity. Some of them don't really understand the mechanics. So I think that the Israeli VCs right now are not really in the game. They're probably looking at Silicon Valley to understand what's next. And I think that, again, this is a time that people can, instead of learning from others, they need to take bold choices and do stuff that they feel is right. So I don't know how it will affect the VC ecosystem. I don't think that, even if it's going to be regulated, I don't think that ICOs are going away. I think that this is a genie that once it's out of the bottle, it cannot go back. There is obviously a new way to fund small business. It doesn't matter if it's a technology business or a small local business. There's a new way to fund it, and this is something that will continue to grow. The regulators, of course, they will intervene, but at the end of the day, they cannot force it to be something that it's not. They cannot force a new company to have the same regulation as a company going to IPO in the stock market, and eventually there's going to be a balance. The question is how many years it will take. It can take a year if they're smart. It can take a decade if people just try to mess it up. But the technology is there and it's not going away.
Yeah, and I think that a good example for that, for an ICO in Israel was Bancor. They tried to raise in ICO $15 million. Eventually, because over demands, they ended up with raising up $150 million. Which is time, 153, and the times 10 what they intended. So we see that like the over demands are also coming from investors. It's not just that the entrepreneurs are pushing it. The investors are actually looking for it and asking for it. Guys, I want to thank you all, unless anyone has something to add. So please feel free if you have some final words here. Thank you very much. Tony, Anton, Amit, Nicola, thank you very much.